Welcome, everyone. So my name is Patrick Paul Walsh. I'm Vice President of Education at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So SDSN is delighted to host this spotlight. Just to tell you a little bit about SDSN. SDSN was an initiative of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's area in 2014, and at the time it was just to provide technical and legal oversight of the post-2015 agenda. But in today's world, we're more a group of academics that mobilise stakeholder partnerships at all levels of governance. So we're absolutely delighted to be involved in a session that's talking about the science policy interface. So it's very exciting. First up, we'll have Imme Scholz, who is actually the co-chair of the UN Global Sustainable Development Report, which will be presented at the General Assembly in 2023. So I have a little background on this, where when I was on sabbatical in New York in 2014, I was actually part of the scientists that did the prototype for the GSDR, which was, I think, it was a prototype in 2014 and 2016. Now, at the end, rather than being appointed by DESA, the independent group of scientists are appointed by members, by the missions, and the report is every 4 years and presented to the General Assembly. So the last report was 2019, and we had the famous 6 transformations and 4 levers, if you remember. So we might hear more about this. So we're quite excited. This is probably the first time we're going to hear the table of contents from this report. So I'm going to hand over for 16 minutes or so to Imme Scholz, Dr. Imme Scholz, who's the co-president of the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Germany. Also, as I say, co-chair of the UN Global Sustainable Development Report 2023. And I'll hand it over to you, Imme, for opening comments and to take us through the outline of this key science policy interface report. And it's exciting to hear this.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I hope that the echo goes away. Thank you for having me this evening. And just to give you a quick overview, of course, we will start in the report with looking at where are we with SDG implementation. And you won't be surprised when I say that obviously we are in a dire situation. COVID-19 and rising levels of conflict and instability and inflation and rising cost of living have caused setbacks, stagnation, and continuing negative trends. So it's very difficult to speak of progress, actually. And from that, you could conclude that it's important to invest in resilience. But we want to look beyond crisis, as the ones I mentioned, and we also look at medium and long-term trends that affect society's capacities to change, and at the same time require transformation. So that includes climate change, biodiversity loss, demographic change, digital transformation, and economic inequality. So when we see that difficult situation and the lack of progress, the question obviously is, this might not only be due to the crisis, but to the inherent difficulties of the transformation process as such. And that's why we try to describe what transformation means, how it occurs in a stylized form, so that we can better understand the specific ways we need to apply the levers of the GSDR 2019. So how should governance act? What type of economic and financial policy do we need? What type of individual and collective action? What's the role of science and technology in the phases of transformation? And for that we use the S-curve, that is a stylized description of what happens when you transform a system. It is very much influenced by innovation research, by research on transition processes, on the introduction of innovations. But we thought it is helpful to understand that that two movements actually need to happen or happen when something transforms, and that is a new sustainable pathway emerges, then accelerates and stabilizes. And this positive change is accompanied by a destabilization, a breakdown, and a phase out of the unsustainable pathway. And if you imagine these two movements, an emerging one and a decaying one, you can imagine all the impediments which are in the way of those processes. So the resistance by vested interests, the resistance because infrastructures for the new pathways are not there yet. You can imagine this with e-vehicles, for example. So it is this transformation process we look at, and where we try to be more specific how to apply the levers, and where we also try to be more specific in naming key interventions which would be needed for promoting the emergence and the acceleration phase in the entry points which were identified of change, which were identified in the previous report. We also have a systematic look at the literature, what we know now about interlinkages, so about the systemic nature of SDGs and the transformations they want. We also look at international spillover effects, which emanate from current policies and may also emanate from SDG implementation. And I already mentioned the key interventions or the high impact interventions. What is important here is that we add a fifth lever to the four ones you may know from the previous GSDR, and that is capacity building. Because we think that the lack of progress we can see in the SDGs, I will repeat, is due to COVID-19, obviously, and the other factors, the crisis I was mentioning. It is also due to the complexity of the SDGs and the complexity of such a deep transformation which we are facing when we want to really implement that, and the difficulties of transformation processes as such. But what we are convinced is that, in fact, no country has the full capacity to really be very successful in the short term, probably, with the implementing the SDGs. And therefore, this is a universal task. It's a universal learning process also. So to be able to generate sustainable alternatives, to scale and replicate them, to maintain strategic direction, so to coordinate across actors, across sectors, across scales, and to manage conflicts. Then to identify the impediments to change. So recognize when you are in an unsustainable trajectory, when you are in a lock-in, or when you have undesired effects. I think the capacity to discern that the current pathway is unsustainable is quite challenging for many societies. And if you have realized it, be able to withdraw support for these unsustainable trajectories and divest human and financial capital from it. And the fourth dimension of these capacities which are needed to be able to engage in transformation is to generate knowledge about system dynamics and feedbacks, so you can anticipate disturbances, and also invest in strengthening institutions and networks to increase diversity and redundancy and to learn continuously. So that is something you will find in the report, also applied to the entry points. And finally, we have a chapter working with science. So because it's part of our mandate to strengthen the science policy interface, and there we think about what is needed to create socially robust science, which is context-specific and relevant for society, and to have society co-creating these analysis and solutions. What is needed to strengthen trust in science, because the crisis have led society to, we have seen a lot of mistrust in science, in vaccines against COVID-19, but also in climate science. What it means and in relation to trust is we echo the proposal of the UN Secretary General to create the global code of conduct for states, media outlets and regulators on the integrity of public information as an evidence base for public policies. We think that this is absolutely important. And in the end, we conclude, we have made a list of policy recommendations where I would just like to highlight, we think that it is important to globally agree on kind of an SDG transformation framework to accelerate action. The pledges last SDG Summit were made for accelerating action, but we have not seen sufficient of that. And to also agree on cooperating on capacity building, because the gap in resources for science and knowledge generation across countries are so huge. In rich countries, per capita spending is 4 times the average of per capita spending in other countries. And for creating context-specific knowledge, you really need to invest in strengthening science systems, but also integrating society, a diversity of societal actors into this task of generating knowledge, applying it, and continuous learning. So maybe that's a first glimpse I can give to you on what we plan to do. I mean, what we have actually nearly written, it's going out. The report went out to member states today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Scholz. So that's exciting. Very much looking forward to seeing it approved and reading the details. But the things I kind of find exciting about the work is that these transformations are what we call in economics, they're going to be Schumpeterian waves, waves of creation and destruction, and you have to understand that, and you have to be able to manage that. So it's great that you have that kind of theoretical framework, because politically that is just going to be so important. And I love the way that you've emphasized the spillovers across nations, because this emphasizes multilateralism. We can't have different nation states just implementing the transformations on their own, because there's spillovers and they have to coordinate and work together. So I like that policy recommendation. And then the last one, second last one, which is really important, is the is capacity building, particularly in the resource constrained countries, that for multilateralism to be really effective in creating a safe operating space for humanity, this really has to work. And then this framework for trust in science, I think is really going to be quite interesting. So I am definitely going to look forward to reading this report in detail, and look forward to the many sessions. I think there's one on February 7th, and this will take us all the way up to the SDG Summit, I am sure. So just to say, as we're moving along here, people online, you're very welcome. And if you want to put in questions in the chat, I'll pick them up here. Also people here, you can have your questions ready. At the end, I'll have time. People can put up their hand and give their name and institution and question at the end. But I'm going to keep it moving along. So our next speaker is Thanos Giannakopoulos, who's the chief of the UN Library here in the UN HQ. Thanos is an innovator as a librarian, and he's going to tell you about his UN Digital Library, which is really excellent, the sort of the innovation that's in it. And also there's going to be a brilliant open science conference coming down the line next week, I believe. I'm looking forward to that as well. So I'll hand the floor to you, Thanos, to take us through that.
Thank you very much, Professor Walsh, for the invitation. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I was delighted to hear the table of contents of the new GSDR report that is going to be released in September. I've noticed that the United Nations, what I would like to present is three items from the work that the United Nations Headquarters Library is undertaking. One is the United Nations Knowledge Commons, which is how we try to deal with all the wonderful resources that the UN produces globally. Secondly is the SDGs taxonomy that we developed in order to connect these resources. And third, I would like to talk a little bit by the proposal that we put forward through a series of conferences, that is the creation of the Global Scientific Commons for the SDGs. So the United Nations Knowledge Commons is actually a suite of programs, networks, and outreach actions, which was initiated by the Libraries of the Global United Nations Secretariat. As an idea, the Knowledge Commons brings all the benefits of the natural commons into the digital realm. One of the aims is to harvest tangible and intangible UN resources that are released in the public domain. The goal is to offer resources to policymakers, UN staff, and citizens worldwide in context, not in bulk, and free of charge, through a network of interoperable repositories. The Central Institutional Repository, the UN Digital Library, has been developed by the UN libraries in New York, Geneva, Vienna, Beirut, and Bangkok. It is currently maintained and updated daily by the UN Giannakopoulos Library. The UN Digital Library is an online knowledge product that collects, connects, preserves, and disseminates diverse UN resources. It is a platform that brings the deliberations, decisions, and actions of the organization's main organs at the citizens' fingertips. It has now become a standard source of reference for UN-produced content, with a search interface in the 6 official languages. In 2022 alone, it recorded over 60 million downloads from 120,000 cities worldwide. However, we now live in a time where simply releasing a resource online means little in this deluge of information on our screens. To ensure accessibility for search engines and machine automation, as well as interoperability with other platforms, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs Statistics Division and the UN Library have worked together to produce an SDGs taxonomy, a tagging system, if you will, which is the connective tissue of diverse resources that identifies their interlinkages. The taxonomy allows online aggregators to connect, organize, discover, or disseminate resources even further with minimal human interaction. The SDGs taxonomy, a series of linked data services offered by the UN Library in the 6 official languages, has been approved by the United Nations Central Executives Board for coordination, and it is available for all to use within and outside the UN system of organizations. Now, this amount of work produced by a handful of UN libraries showcases we need not reinvent the wheel when we talk of the need for infrastructure to secure a knowledge commons to support and accelerate the knowledge engineering and SDGs implementation. Libraries are institutions for openness and equitable access to knowledge. They represent a network of networks that is well equipped to understand the intricacies of protecting the global public good, that is, publicly funded research. Libraries are embedded in communities and run very successful institutional repositories and other knowledge platforms. In the realm of digital information monopolies, libraries, through interoperability and digital literacy, bring to the forefront digital resources that your commercial search engine and your social medium may fail to do. As I mentioned, the UN Giannakopoulos Library has been putting forward the idea of the creation of a global scientific commons for the SDGs. A commons that is an infrastructure in service of the Sustainable Development Goals, one that can support and promote the global normalization of opening scientific outputs and processes, and the re-evaluation of research assessments and the academic rewards culture. An infrastructure ensuring that context-specific science is supported and recognized across groups and regions, given that scientists in many developing regions and from indigenous and minority groups face barriers to both publishing and accessing resources. Recently, one of our researchers from the Open Science Conference mentioned that she would have to secure $11,000 to be able to publish an article in a reputable journal, and that is an annual salary. Interdisciplinarity, the diverse nature of research and the prism of intersectionality, along with measures to support research for and by marginalized and regional communities, can lead to a more holistic and inclusive approach for the research the planet needs in our rapidly digitalized and data-driven future. A commons that will be intentional in securing a system-wide shift to biodiversity, inclusiveness, multilingualism, and research diversity, addressing gender asymmetries, being adept in communicating science and nurturing partnerships in pursuit of science of social relevance for all. I was delighted to hear something similar coming from the report that will be submitted in September. So scientists, academia, research funding agencies, librarians, publishers, and young researchers with their wonderful grassroots initiatives have a crucial role to play in developing this digital commons for the benefit of humanity. Open science may be the keystone to assert everyone's human right to share in scientific advancement and benefits. Since 2019, the UN Library, in collaboration with partners, has been convening the UN Conference on Open Science, placing the idea of the commons in the public dialogue. In the first Open Science Conference organized by the UN Library and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Division of Sustainable Development Goals, a roadmap for such a commons was drawn through the consensus and agreement of 19 eminent personalities in academia and scholarly communications. The roadmap presented key principles for the creation of a global commons and identified its elements. In the second Open Science Conference, we concentrated on the lessons learned on open science from the pandemic, which could be employed in climate action. It is interesting here to note that climate research literature, in its majority, resided behind online paywalls, while misinformation and disinformation about climate action is freely available online. The second Open Science Conference concluded that there is a necessity for systemic change in the scientific knowledge production chain and acknowledged the open exchange of scientific data and information as a fundamental element of the scientific process of the commons. I would like now to invite you to join us on 8-10 February 2023, that is next week, at the third UN Open Science Conference organized by the UN Library with the Department of Economic and Social Affairs Division of Sustainable Development Goals and UNESCO, to take part in this discussion about the creation of a global scientific knowledge commons for the SDGs. As the momentum of open science is unwavering, powered by new groundbreaking national policies, international instruments, and targeted cooperation within and among nations, the global scientific commons for the SDGs lends itself very easily to the open science suite of practices. I hope we will be able to continue the discussion in the conference. Thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to address you here today.
Okay, that's wonderful, Thanos. So, and I think this is linked to Dr. Scholz's point about building capacities and how do we actually transfer capacities to less resource countries. And I think it mightn't sound that exciting, but library repositories, when we think of, do we have a digital infrastructure, publicly owned, that can transfer knowledge free of charge to every corner of this earth? And the answer is yes. The libraries, they have interoperable repositories, and that's possible. But the point is, to use that highway, a lot of work has to be done. And it's incredible the work that's been done in the digital library here, in terms of I can go into any outcome document and create a pathway back to the statements and back to the different agency documents and so on and so forth. So that's amazing, and it's a huge resource. But in reality, we can tag with this UN GSDR taxonomy any data, any publication, any open educational resource, and we can just set it free across the world. And of course, we have to put in open licenses, we've got to protect intellectual property, etc. But this is really important. And of course, the open science movement, back with Niamh Brennan and Trinity, Thanos knows this, we've been publishing Diamond publications for a few years, which is free to submit and also free to use. That's what we mean by Diamond publications. But academia has to understand the importance of creating the knowledge commons that you talk about, the scientific commons, and how to contribute to that. and how important it is that everyone in Africa can contribute, everyone in Africa can use it, and so on. It's a disgrace that you have to pay $12,000 to publish your paper, because that just excludes most of the earth actually publishing in high quality journals. Anyway, you said it all. So again, any questions online, put them in the chat. Any questions here, you'll hold them, but we'll get to that. So we move on to our next speaker, Jayashri Wyatt, who's from the UN Academic Impact Chief Education Outreach Section, and I'll let her, you have the floor to describe the science policy interface you're undertaking in UN area.
Great, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. As our first speaker mentioned, there are so many challenges that we face globally today, and accelerating action and progress and transformation can be difficult. So I'm here today to really talk about and touch on how partnerships around higher education institutions can focus on open scientific cooperation across borders and build an open SDG knowledge commons that enhances science policy interfaces really at all levels of governance. I'm here today in my capacity overseeing the United Nations Academic Impact Initiative, and I'll really just focus today on what we're doing in this network to do this, and the places where I think we can increase our impact and engagement. So we're really trying to take a systems approach in our work and really looking at connectivity and information sharing, and in a lot of ways just tooling up and capacity building, as well as our first speaker had mentioned as well. So just to give you a little bit of a background, the UN Academic Impact, we established it in 2010, and it's a network of 1,600 institutions of higher education and learning from over 150 countries around the world. And all of these member institutions, we're continuing to grow this network of universities. What they do is they align their research, their education, their teaching, their curriculum, and their community outreach with the Sustainable Development Goals. And obviously, we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without, institutions of higher learning playing a really key role. And particularly, I'll touch on science and technology and academia for this intervention today. Just as Thanos did, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the engagements that we are currently working on. I think speaking about capacity building and creating levers for transformation and making knowledge accessible is something that we think a lot about in the UNAI and with our member institutions. So one of the things that we're embarking on right now is an SDG toolkit. And this is going to be a repository really of best practices from across universities that are in our networks, who are generating knowledge and learning and curricula about how we can actually deal with the transformations that we're looking to create. And I think just to highlight one of our member institutions, the University of Bergen in Norway is already working on helping us to build out this incredible resource. The toolkit in Norway is doing so very effectively with their tools on the SDGs and working closely with their own government to adopt science-based measures and put in place these very informed policies based on their scientific research. So this is one of the areas that we're currently working in. The other place that I just wanted to flag for this conversation is also the UN has all kinds of important conferences that are happening all the time. So for example, in March, we have the Water Conference, which is coming up. This is a place where civil society and especially academia can really make an impact. They can bring their research to the table and they can connect directly with policymakers. Currently, we're seeing only about 6% of civil society is represented by academia. So it's part of our strategic engagement to really look at how do we get many more people from the scientific research community to be engaged in these processes in the United Nations proper. And we have two of our member universities, the University of Manitoba and also Bergen again, who are going to be involved in the water conference coming up. The last thing that I really wanted to just flag is something that we're working with the SDSN on. And this is really, I think, going to be rather revolutionary. We're working to create an overlay repository of curriculum, multimedia information, and another repository where academia can put their multimedia resources and curriculum so that it can be accessed in multi-languages and it can be accessed at any time. We're going to work with Thanos in the library to help us to tag this so that it can be found really easily as well. So this is something that is going to be a long-term project, but we're really excited about it because if we're able to get it off the ground and we can get the right funding for it, we can, I think, address a lot of these recommendations that are coming out in the report about how we create the knowledge bases, and we can really help to create much greater connection between the scientific community and policymaking and practitioners as well. So I think that's it from the United Nations academic impact and how we're really using a systems approach with this vast network of universities in academia to promote scientific research. Thank you.
Yeah, again, that's wonderful. And there's a very engaged academic community with the UN academic impact, and particularly across the 6 regions of the UN. It's excellent. Yeah, and we're excited as well to get going on the overlay journal and for OER. And we're just going to count on armies of catalogers in libraries and armies of students and academics to help us put all this together, because and populate your concept of the global scientific commons, because with high quality material, and get it distributed through all the libraries. So I think it's a game changer, and as you say, will support a lot of the recommendations that are coming out of this report. So finally, but last but not least, at Brighton, Kaoma is our global director of youth, of SDSN Youth, and I'll give you the floor because I know time is short. So I'll see the youth perspective, as they say, on science policy interface, and to see what you think of what's happening here.
Thank you so much. Very excited to be able to speak alongside other incredible speakers. It's also very exciting to learn about the UN academic impact and the SDG toolkits that you are developing. I know other youth-focused institutions like the Global Schools of SDSN equally produces this type of content, although tailored to K-12 students, younger people, SDSN youth as well, working towards developing climate literacy toolkits to ensure that every young person has access to this type of knowledge and understanding. So it's very exciting to see all these intersections in our work. I'll be able to speak to you specifically about the work of SDSN youth, but also the work of other youth-led institutions with respect to transforming knowledge sharing, creating pathways and allies for knowledge and understanding, but also creating a broader network of young leaders that are translating policy into action and localizing education in many different aspects. There's a concept called intergenerational equity, which requires that every generation has a right to inherit the same diversity in natural, cultural, health, and economic resources enjoyed by previous generations, and to equitable access to the use and benefit of these resources. In this respect, educational resources should equally create a condition where today's younger generation and the generations to come have the same competencies, the skills, and the knowledge for them to become leaders of tomorrow. Partnerships for the implementation and realization of the Sustainable Development is not simply an attractive concept. It is not simply an idea underpinning the UN 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Partnerships is a goal in itself, as demonstrated in SDG number 17, which is the fulcrum of the Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on creating long-lasting partnerships. Partnerships can be focused on quite a number of different pathways, both economic relations, but they most importantly encompass science, technology, and innovation, capacity building through knowledge sharing and enabling technologies. The deployment of science, technology, and innovation spans economic and social issues such as diverse and alternative solutions to food production, infrastructure, health, energy, manufacturing, and environmental issues. For instance, we've seen agricultural practices that have adopted best practices from information and communication technologies to data and identify information regarding other pathways to transforming food systems. We've also seen that in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was science, technology, and access to learning that created democracy to learn and acquire new skills. The initiatives I've described are not surprising because science is the original diplomat. It was Louis Pasteur, the French chemist and microbiologist, who stated that science knows no country because knowledge belongs to all humanity and is the torch that illuminates the world. It's for this reason that scientists are recognized globally because of having huge international mobility due to their accredited passion for their work, which causes them to interact with research institutions, private corporations, political and influential figures. But it's also important that as we look at creating partnerships for sustainable development and specifically education, we also look at technological inequities, more specifically the gap that continues to widen between the West and the Global South. Digital disparities and disparities in STI are still evident between the North and the South, from lesser recognition and funding of Southern journals or research institutes to a lack of hardware and technology to be able to engage in innovation. There is also an urgent need to close inequalities for young people, evidenced by inconsistent funding for STI, which is science, technology, and innovation researchers, less global representation of young women and girls in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as ICT subjects, and the exclusion of young people in state partnerships for science policy. Globally, we're very lucky in history to have 1.8 billion young people between the ages of 10 to 24. This equates to 1.8 billion essential leaders, communicators, and innovators for partnerships and policymaking processes. Governments and decision makers, but also people that are gathered here today and those joining us online, should value young people as a key component to a thriving economy and stable society, with the intention to invest in science, technology, and mathematics education as a means to promote personal empowerment, as well as meet labor market needs. Beyond science, technology, and innovation, we also need formal partnerships to achieve the SDGs. And this may look like engagements with the UN Office for Partnerships, Partnerships Platform, 2030 Connect, the UN Smart Sustainable Cities, the private sector, and many others. In summary, and as I conclude with the establishment of the UN Youth Office and the Summit of the Future, both on the horizon, partnerships between the world's over 1.9 billion young people and the UN member states, financial institutions, academia, scientists, and the private sector is the only pathway towards unlocking intergenerational equity and achieving Agenda 2030. In light of the upcoming historical event for the future generation as set out in the UN Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, SDSN Youth and its partners, which includes a network of 4,100 members, including over 870 youth member organizations in over 127 countries, shall over the next coming months embark on global consultations to establish consensus on what the future should look like and what can be done to address the multilateral solutions for a better future through deepening of stronger solidarity with the world's young people and future generations. The ongoing perennial lack of multilateral cooperation risks failing the most important test, which is that of genuinely engaging all young people to eradicate unemployment, eliminate extremism, and reduce climate change. Any failure in placing global youth as a fulcrum to sustainable development could lead to unmitigated economic, political, environmental, and social disaster. This makes the value of authentic partnerships even more clear. No single person or institution can tackle global challenges single-handedly. In Africa, where I come from, there's a proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Thank you.
Okay, that's a great, lovely way to end. So yes, the Global Schools Toolkit is worth looking at from K-12. Actually, you probably could share that, and because it's, again, an open access resource that can be done. And that is true. This is Thanos's and everyone's point. Science is without borders. We produce science to everyone to use and to cite, and somehow we allow it to get commercialized and we lose our property rights, and somehow we have this divide, which is actually extremely dangerous for humanity and for going forward. So this call for science without borders is very well taken. And of course, I count on SDSN youth supporting us in populating that science commons. And we have more than a small army there as well to help us out, interns and people looking to progress themselves in knowledge and learning. So we have just a few minutes for questions. So if you want to put up your hand, say who you are, your institution, turn on your mic, go for it. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm Russell Crawford. I'm a winner of the Patents for Humanity Award of the U.S. Patent Office, and I'm also a founder of 1 Million Wells. 1 Million Wells is actually on fire to resolve the water issue. We are not well drillers, we are educators and trainers. Our plan will furnish water for 1.2 billion people by 2030 at a cost of as little as 56 cents per person. We will require partners to fulfill our goal. We have the proof of our success. We need someone to speak personally with about this issue. Can the members of the panel give me a contact name and an email address? And when I won the award, Patents for Humanity Award, I was the only individual that wasn't associated with a university, and that has been a hindrance to me. So I hope y'all will help.
Well, thank you very much for drawing our attention to that. Yeah, I'm happy to connect with you afterwards. I think there's obviously the water conference, which is coming up, and we hope that you're registered and able to attend. But there are also UN water colleagues that we can potentially connect you with as well. So happy to try to facilitate that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Then yourself, yeah. Go ahead. Till it goes red. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon to everybody, to all the dignitaries, representatives in the room. My name is Solomon Mwamba, and I am the president of the United Towns Agency for the Sub-Saharan regions in Africa, and I'm also the founder for Majestic Chain Technologies. What we do, we build blockchain technology for financial inclusion in Africa, also for scientific usages, agritech, and seeing that there is a big gap between active technology that could be used on the continent versus what's in the West. What is the United Nations doing right now to combat that? And have you guys considered using blockchain technology to close the gap? Thank you.
So I think thank you for this introduction. So we have been considering the use of blockchain technology, but mostly for creating levels of assurances on official United Nations documentation. So and down the line, as we progress with the United Knowledge Commons, which is under the governance of the UN Secretariat Libraries across the globe, we will be able to expand the use of blockchain so that we make sure that content, digital content that is available through our resources are more or less authenticated from us and stays as such. I am aware that the Office of Information and Communication Technologies is looking into blockchain as well, but unfortunately I'm not informed of the extent of their projects at the moment.
Yeah, and of course this is in the context of science policy interface, so you could imagine a lake of knowledge and ideas, and then you want to kind of harvest them and get them into the right committee structures, whether it's the European Parliament or UN meetings or Congress, and you could see the use of AI and blockchain within that purpose. So that's what we're talking about here, even sorting out from grassroots what's good science, what's usable science. But it's certainly embodied in some of these technologies through library systems, but it could be employed even more, and it's kind of exciting. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Heinrich. I'm one of the founders at DeepMob. We're a Dutch startup and we provide volunteering tools. All the impact that we do is based on the SDGs, and we provide our municipalities, our clients, with all the opportunities that is measured via these SDGs. But we want to do more with just saying, well, you provided to SDG 1, to SDG 2, to SDG 3. So I'm really interested about the discussion that we're having about impact measurements. So my question is, what are the three biggest issues that we need to solve together in measuring SDGs, and how we can help out local communities, that they also have the feeling that they contribute to SDGs, because it feels very global, but if you want to do it on a local level, how can we help them out? And we also want to provide the tools for that. So what can we learn? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very critical question, because what we are doing within SDSN, Global Schools, and many other partners and allies of the United Nations is to, translate knowledge into practical solutions on the ground. And what we've seen is partnering both with higher learning institutions, creating synergies with local organizations on the ground, allows to now see the tangible sort of pathways to localizing sustainable development goals. I think they look very global, extremely expansive, but what we've also learned is that when you work with different partners that are already translating these, policy frameworks into, tangible solutions, they become even more attainable, because then you can see the tangible sort of activities being done on the ground. So I would say creating synergy and partnerships. We've also seen through our work with the UN Youth Envoy's Office how we are beginning to identify young players who are innovators in science and technology, engineering, mathematics, those that are working on advocacy and education, and creating this sort of community of practice through the Office of the UN Youth Envoy, and setting it as a basis and foundation upon which we can mobilize and create coordination across many different organizations.
Okay, sorry if I overlooked you before. Go ahead. It will turn red. Just there you go.
Thank you very much. I'm from the International Atomic Energy Agency. This morning I was able to give a statement on the work the agency does in the area of the application of nuclear science to bring solutions to issues of environmental and health. And I want to pose a question to Dr. Scholz regarding the study that is yet to be published in September. She mentioned about the role of capacity building. And the IAEA has about 175 member states, and through technical cooperation has been building capacity for these member states, especially member states from developing countries. And I want to ask, is there a mention of the work that the agency is doing with regards to building capacity? And if not, is there an opportunity for our participation in bringing this information to the UN system? Thank you.
Can you respond to that, Dr. Scholz?
Yeah, in general, we do not have a systematic review of UN agencies doing capacity building. We assume that they do it, and it's good to hear that your agency also does it. But I think we are in the process of review now with the member states. So in that respect, if you have something to which, like a small box text or so, you could send it to UN, to the Secretariat of the GSDR, and then the whole IGS would look at it and see whether it fits into the report or not.
So I think we're coming to the end. So what's left for me to do is just to thank everyone who came here and everyone who came online, but particularly people on the panel, Dr. Scholz. So we're very much looking forward to the report. It was great. We got an insight into the outline of what's there, so we're excited to read it. And again, Thanos, looking forward to the Open Science Conference next week. You can come in virtually as well, right? And we can attend, yeah. We're more than excited to be working with UN Academic Impact. Really exciting people there, and I think we're going to have great synergies and partnerships coming from that, and working with the library as well. And of course, every step of the way, I'll talk to SDSN Youth and the Youth Office, and we'll do everything we can to encourage entrepreneurs and innovation and get people educated and have a focus, obviously, on the Global South as much as anywhere else. So I'll bring proceedings to a close, because I think we have the official session closing the partnership forum. But it was a real joy to be here today and to listen to the forthcoming report and to listen to the dialogue here. But this is just obviously a start of a conversation. But as an academic, I would say, I think, science, technology, innovation is a big part of the solution to achieve these SDGs, and we're going to get as many scientists into the policy dialogues as we can. It's just so important. So thank you. I'll sign off here, and happy to talk to people afterwards. And thanks for coming online again and for being here.